I spoke with Noam Chomsky on November 5th, the day after the historic election that brought Barack Obama to the presidency. He joined me from a studio in Boston where he lives, and we talked about everything from Obama to anarchism. The entire interview is part of the 10-hour MP3 CD of Chomsky recordings, and most of it has not aired anywhere else. I began by asking Chomsky to talk about the origins of his own activism during this interview, which we'll play for you right now. You are in your 80th year of life right now, and you have an unparalleled legacy of political commentary and activism. Let's go back to the start of your political activism. Do you trace it back to the Vietnam War and speaking out? And if so, was that sort of the seminal moment for you?
In the general public sphere, yes, but I was an activist when I was a teenager. Actually, the first political article that I wrote was I can date precisely because I remember the occasion. It was in 1939, February, fourth grade. I was the editor and probably the only reader of the fourth grade newspaper. And I had an editorial on the advance of fascism in Europe, very frightening advance, Austria, Czechoslovakia, and the occasion for this was the fall of Barcelona to Franco. I was very much interested in the Spanish Civil War, and had this sense that this dark cloud of fascism extending over the whole world. I was concerned about that at the time, and also many other issues, which I'm still concerned about. I mean, it was naturally different from today, but pretty much the same.
What about the 70s? There were some very important moments in the 70s that are captured in our archives, the Pentagon Papers on the Vietnam War, and of course the end of the war itself. What was your career in the 70s? What were you most focused on in the 70s?
Well, the early 70s, it was the Vietnam War. So, for example, take, say, the Pentagon Papers. I actually helped Dan Ellsberg distribute them, and I had advance copies. And in fact, wrote about it, was able to write about it as soon as they appeared because I had already read them, both the version that Dan was distributing and the government version, which came out shortly after, and was speaking about it and so on. And then, of course, the war simply expanded. I mean, we didn't know then how much it had expanded. We know now, though it's still not reported. It turns out that the bombing of rural Cambodia, which at the time was known to be severe, was actually about 5 times as high as what was reported then. In fact, greater than all bombing in all theaters during World War II. This is rural Cambodia, and we now know what lay behind it. An order loyally transmitted from Nixon by Henry Kissinger, which had the immortal words, anything that flies against anything that moves. In other words, an outright call for genocide. That's rural Cambodia, 5 times the total bombing in World War II. And it, as the scholars who released this, Kiernan and Owen Taylor, point out, two of the leading specialists on Cambodia, this essentially mobilized the Khmer Rouge, previously a relatively small, mostly unknown group, but it turned into a massive force of enraged peasants, and we know what followed. Those were things to be worried about. And furthermore, other things began pretty soon. So in December 1965, the U.S. authorized Indonesia to invade East Timor, and then instantly provided Indonesia with substantial aid to carry out what they knew to be a massacre. It ended up being about as close to genocide as anything in the post-World War II period, and that was another continual commitment from 1975. Same with the Middle East, which is always a major crisis. In January 1976, the Arab states, the confrontation states, Syria, Egypt, Jordan, proposed in the Security Council a political settlement of the Israel-Arab conflict in terms of what has become an overwhelming international consensus. A peaceful political settlement, guarantees for the rights of every state in the region to live in peace and security and so on the international border, maybe with minor modifications, was vetoed by the United States. And since then there's been a consistent policy of unilateral U.S. rejectionism, blocking a political settlement of something that, actually, when I was an activist in the 1940s, that was one of my main preoccupations and still is. And so that's an issue. And, of course, that just expanded into all sorts of directions. What happened, the crimes of the occupied territories, the 5 invasions of Lebanon, and much more. And then it continued by 1980. Atrocities which throughout Latin America had been hideous enough were expanding to Central America. And through the 80s, Central America was targeted by Reagan's terrorist wars, which had a horrendous cost. So that became a major issue, and there's never a shortage.
One of the things that has always impressed me and so many others about the work that you've done is your ability to use publicly available facts and statements made by powerful people, by ordinary people like preserved in the archives, to indict the policies of government and corporate elites. Still, it seems that there isn't enough rigor and fact-checking among many commentators and writers and activists on the left. Why do you think that is, and how important is it to be fact-based in one's approach to social justice?
Well, in my opinion, it's crucially important. That's why I'm never impressed by rhetoric, oratory, and so on. It kind of turns me off. I'd like to hear a reasoned argument based on reliable information to the extent that that's possible. Otherwise, the effects are negative. It just it controls and marginalizes people. If people want to take their fate into their own hands, they're going to have to understand as well as we can what's actually happening in the world in their own circumstances and elsewhere, and have a sensible grasp of what the options are to do something about it. Hence, I don't really see any alternative to being fact-based and concerned with rational argument.
And yet the major media censors you so deliberately, so completely, even though all of what you're saying is rooted in fact.
I don't see why that's surprising. I mean, why should powerful systems want to help undermine themselves? So, for example, today, as you can imagine, starting at 8 o'clock in the morning, I've been constantly talking about the election to BBC, to Estonian audiences all over the world. This is the first one in the United States, and of course it's not mainstream media. But that's to be understood. I mean, why should the mainstream media want me to bring out the deficiencies in the way they are presenting the real world and the ways in which these deficiencies help manipulate the public and control it? They have no reason to want to do that.
Professor Chomsky, you have identified with anarchist politics throughout your political career. How have your views on anarchism evolved over the year, and do you see it as a viable worldview on a mass scale in terms of achieving social justice to solve the problems of the type you were just discussing?
Well, I've, since childhood, when I was haunting anarchist bookstores and anarchist offices in New York, since from then till today, I've essentially understood anarchism to be not a specific recipe for how the world should work, although it has principles, but rather as a kind of a tendency in human affairs towards trying to identify structures of hierarchy, oppression, domination, wherever they may be, from the family to international affairs, identifying them, insisting that they justify themselves. They are not self-justifying. And if they can't meet that burden of justification, moving to dismantle them, hence move towards a more free world. Exactly where it'll lead, I'm certainly not smart enough to say, and I don't think anyone is. Political activism, I think, is a little bit like mountain climbing. You work hard and you climb a peak, and then you discover to your surprise that there's another peak back there that's even higher that you hadn't even known about, and you start to work on that one. Well, yeah, that's what things are like. There's lots of peaks around there that have not entered into our consciousness. And I hope we'll get to them, but there's a lot of work to be done before we do. As this proceeds, we move closer to kind of an anarchist vision.
Now, the Pacifica Radio Archives, as we mentioned earlier, is launching its new education initiative called the Campus Campaign, sharing audio with the schools around the United States from the archives' vault. As someone who's spent decades climbing these peaks, writing about social justice, working on these issues, what is the significance of passing down to our children our audio history and the importance of the recorded voice, too, as compared to the written word?
Well, the importance of the recorded voice is being demonstrated rather dramatically right now by a project that Howard Zinn and Anthony Arnov are directing, the Voices Project, which takes the Voices material that's connected with his deservedly influential people's history of the United States and has actors reading the original texts. Now, that's been a tremendous success. I mean, it's quite different to read about Sojourner Truth than to hear her words, spoken by eloquently. And in your case, the Pacific Archives, it's the actual voices. This is a record of live activism, engagement, interaction through the, extremely important 60-year period of world history. It's really incomparable. So I think it's enormously important.
We live in a very dangerous world still. If anything, it's gotten more dangerous. And despite the election of Barack Obama, many of us are afraid for our children's future, our grandchildren's future. Are you afraid for your grandchildren's future?
Very much so. I mean, there are two issues which have long-standing issues. I mean, by now they're too evident to be suppressed, that really involve the threat of something like species extinction. One is the threat of nuclear war, which is very severe. I mean, it's kind of a miracle that we haven't had a nuclear war since 1945. It's come very close frequently. And the threat is, in many respects, increasing. Just yesterday, the Russian president announced that Russia would put some sort of missile operations in Kaliningrad, way to the west. That's very dangerous. It's happening in predicted reaction to the U.S. installation of what's called an anti-missile system in Poland and the Czech Republic, which strategic analysts understand perfectly well as effectively a first-strike weapon, understood on all sides, and threatening to the Russian deterrent. So yes, that's increasing the threat of nuclear war as we speak. And that's just one piece of a much bigger picture. Well, without going on through that, the other major threat is, as everyone knows, environmental catastrophe. Just how serious it'll be, nobody knows for certain. But we can be very confident that the longer we delay, the worse the consequences will be for our grandchildren and for the poor people of the world. So, for example, Bangladesh will suffer much worse than the United States will. And that is also imminent, not the catastrophe, but the decisions about whether to mitigate it. Those are for right now. Anyone who's not worried about these two things is just, not thinking about the world or their children.
Now, you are considered the left's major superstar, a position I know you're highly uncomfortable with good reason. Is it unhealthy, you think, for people to place so much faith in one person and their achievements?
It's a mistake to place any faith in one person, me or anyone else. You just, you have to, the world's a complicated place. You have to acquire information from many perspectives, opinion from many perspectives, and work things out for yourself. I mean, I don't try to hide my opinions. In fact, I want them to be as obvious and apparent as they can be. But that's a help, intended to be at least a help to the listener. So you know how to qualify, how to, triangulate, if you like. Here's where this opinion's coming from. Check and see if it sounds correct to you.
It is going to be your 80th birthday in December. I know you don't like talking about your personal life, but any plans for the celebration?
To ignore it. That's my only plan.
What is the significance of Barack Obama's election to the presidency? Do you see it as a referendum against the last 8 years, a victory against racism, a vote for more wealth distribution, or all of the above?
Well, the great significance of the election is that he was elected. If you go back 40 years or 20 years, it would have been unthinkable that the two Democratic candidates, leading candidates, would be a woman and an African-American, and that one of them, in this case an African-American, was elected. That's significant. It shows that the country has become more civilized. And it's also important to remember why. These are the effects of the activism of the 1960s and the aftermath. So the feminist movement, for example, was primarily a movement of the 70s and other movements later. And these, the active engagement of people, for large measure young people, has changed the society, simply made it a more civilized society. Why are people voting? Well, that's really hard to say. Barack Obama managed to portray himself, as he in fact indicated occasionally, as more or less a blank slate. This is a vote for change. 80% of the population in the United States thinks the country's going in the wrong direction. So any candidate who had a gray cell functioning would have said, I'm the candidate for change, naturally. And of course they'd all run against George Bush, as McCain did as well, because the last 8 years have been a disaster. So yes, he's a candidate for change. He's running against Bush. What is he running for? Well, that's where you start writing the words on the blank slate. There's some indication, but not too much. And even where there is an indication, you can't be at all confident that it will be enacted. In fact, what he does will depend very much on the active engagement of the public, as in the past. I mean, we have the first exit polls showed that the leading concern of voters was health care. That's been true for decades, in fact, and there's a good reason for it. The health care system is a disaster. It's by far the most expensive in the industrial world, about twice per capita expenditures, has some of the worst outcomes. These are not just statistics. This affects people's lives intimately and dramatically.